The image of the journey is as ancient as the stories that people have been telling since the beginning of time. The journey. Chaucer's pilgrims on their way to Canterbury telling their tales. The journey of Ulysses, whether it's Homer's version of traveling for decades, or James Joyce's version of wandering around Dublin for one day. The journey is a metaphor, of course, for life. And today we have this journey, this very familiar journey for us as Christians, the journey of these disciples on this first Sunday night after the death of Christ. We call it Easter. They did not yet have a name for it in their confusion. And they journeyed to Emmaus, some say Emmaus. In Greek it was called Emmaus, the city of victory. They were hardly feeling victorious. Everything that they had hoped for, everything that they had longed for, everything that they had imagined was gone. The Messiah was dead. There was no hope. There was no victory for them. And then, as is most important on the journey, a companion comes along to share the way with them and speaks to them about the scriptures, beginning with Moses, and then at table sits down with them, and with simple bread and a blessing, broken and shared, they recognize that yes, the Christ is alive. This Jesus that they had saw as the Messiah is truly alive, and he has come to liberate them not from political oppression, but from death to fullness of life. This Jesus is alive. And what do? They return to Jerusalem, to the true city of victory. Victory of God's love. Victory of God's life. Victory of God's healing for God's people. Yesterday on television, I was able to catch just a few minutes of that wonderful film that Ridley Scott made a few years ago, I think about 2005, called Kingdom of Heaven, about the Crusades in the 12th century, centered in Jerusalem. The Crusades. Perhaps there was no real estate on earth, a couple square miles, the city of Jerusalem, where so much blood has been shed over millennia. Even before Jesus' time, and then with the Romans, the Greeks and then the Romans, and then the Crusades, and to this day, to the latest suicide bomber, blood being shed over this place that some people call the Kingdom of Heaven, this city of Jerusalem. But God's kingdom is not to be found on a map. God's kingdom does not have territory. God's kingdom is the kingdom of the heart. This is where God's kingdom is. This is what they understand when they break bread with Jesus at this table. The New Jerusalem is the heart that is open to God's love, to God's reign. And we hope for this, and we experience the tension of this. We experience the tension of this because the journey is never simply a geographic journey. The real journey is always a journey on the inside. It's an interior pilgrimage where we find the meaning of our life. And that's what we're called to. We're called wherever we are, in whatever place, to journey into God's kingdom. And whatever place we're in, to change that place from the Garden of Gethsemane to the Garden of Eden. That is our task as followers of Jesus. And so we live then with this tension. We live with this tension that has particular peculiarities, because the first peculiarity is that we dare to hope. We dare to hope as we are on this journey. And what is hope? Well, hope is not just wishing. And hope is not just a sure bet. Just putting your money like yesterday on a sure winner. No, this is what Václav Havel, the first president of the Czech Republic, in 1993, years before he was elected president, this is what he said about hope. Listen carefully, sisters and brothers. He said, hope is a state of mind, not of the world. In other words, it's inside us, not outside us. Hope is a state of mind, not of the world. Either we have hope or we don't. It is a dimension of the soul, an orientation of the spirit. It is not the same thing as joy that things are going well, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that makes sense regardless of how it turns out. In other words, hope is daring to believe that with God all things are possible. And ultimately, even in spite of setbacks and tragedies and loss, with God, everything will come out all right for us and for our world. And so that's how we journey on this interior journey of the Spirit. And the second point is a different translation of that wonderful reading we heard from Peter today, that second reading. We have a different translation here. He says, conduct yourselves with reverence during the time of your sojourn. An earlier translation says, you are sojourners in a strange land. In other words, the place where we inhabit, this land that we live in, is never completely home for us, because our hearts are made for our ultimate home. And so every once in a while, into this place breaks in eternity. Into this place breaks in infinity. Into this place breaks in God's love. Into our common life breaks in God's peace. Those moments that are hints of what our life will ultimately be. The Irish have a wonderful name for it. They call it a thin place, where we begin to already experience God's presence. Breaking through the finite is eternity into our lives. It's St. John's Gospel who says it so well. St. John's Gospel who has no vision of the resurrection, because when Jesus Christ is raised up on the cross, St. John says he is raised up in glory. It's one and the same moment. His death is his resurrection into the eternal life and eternal love of God, because in God's presence everything is the eternal now. And our now is the beginning of eternity. Open your hearts, open your minds, dare to believe. Yes, sometimes our hearts are on fire and sometimes they're filled with fear, like those apostles on the road. But Jesus is here at this table to break the bread for us and then to send us forth with this good news. We don't have to wait till our heart stops beating to experience God's eternal love and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It was St. Catherine of Siena, that great and wise woman, who put it this way: all the way to heaven